Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're taking something that, let's be honest, most people might consider a totally sleep-inducing document, the City of Big Lake's 2025 Popular Annual Financial Report, and we're flipping it on its head. We are going to turn all those dry numbers into a pretty fascinating story about community investment, careful planning, and how a modern city actually functions behind the scenes. If you've ever found yourself wondering exactly how a city manages its money to, keep the streetlights on and the parks green, well, you are in exactly the right place. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the big picture, move on to understanding the fund structure, look inside the general fund, check out enterprise funds in action, and finally, wrap up with Big Lake's financial health.
All right, Section 1, the big picture, scale and scope. Before we even think about looking at a spreadsheet, I want you to take a second and just picture the daily realities of living in a city. Think about the smooth roads you drive on to get to work, the safe neighborhoods you sleep in, the well-maintained parks where your kids go to play. These aren't just things that magically happen, right? They are the tangible, everyday results of carefully managed public resources. Big Lake, for instance, maintains 19 different city parks and over 20 miles of trails. There's a public swimming beach, a weekly farmers market, year-round community events, the whole shebang. So when we talk about municipal finance today, we aren't just talking about abstract math. We're talking about the literal funding that creates the quality of life in a community.
And as you might guess, creating that quality of life takes some serious capital. $24.73 million to be exact. That is the massive total annual city budget for Big Lake in 2025. It's a staggering number, honestly, and it really puts into perspective the sheer scale of the operation here. It takes a highly dedicated team of professionals to manage something this big. We're talking 52 full-time employees, 21 part-time employees, plus seasonal workers, all being guided by the mayor, the city council, and the city administrator.
Now, contrast that enormous $24 million budget with this number, $5.89 million. That is the 2025 property tax levy. I really want to point this out because, a lot of people just assume their property taxes cover the entire city budget. But in reality, the property tax levy is definitely the primary local funding source for essential services, but it's only a fraction of that total $24.73 million pie. The city actually has to leverage your tax dollars right alongside a bunch of other revenue sources to make up the difference. Which brings us to Section 2, understanding the fund structure, and what I like to call the bucket metaphor.
To manage all this money and, more importantly, to ensure strict accountability, local governments use something called fund accounting. The absolute best way to wrap your head around this is to think of it like your household budget, where you use separate bank accounts or buckets for very specific purposes. You wouldn't dip into your kid's college fund to pay for this week's groceries, right? Well, cities operate under even stricter rules than that. The city divides its financial ecosystem into two main buckets. On one side, you have governmental funds. These provide those traditional city services that benefit everybody, like police and parks, and they are mostly supported by property taxes. On the other side, you've got enterprise funds. Now, these run almost exactly like independent businesses. They provide specific services and are funded almost entirely by the fees people pay to use those services, not by your property taxes. Let's move to Section 3, inside the general fund. This is where we follow your tax dollar. Let's crack open that first bucket. The general fund is the primary operating fund for core municipal services in Big Lake, and for 2025, it holds a budget of $7.37 million. This is where we literally follow the money to see exactly how it fuels the city day in and day out. Out of all the revenue coming in, a full two-thirds, 66%, comes directly from property taxes and special assessments. That is the lion's share. The remaining third is pieced together from things like licenses and permits, intergovernmental grants, franchise fees, and charges for various other services. Now, here is something really interesting about how the city handles that 66% tax expectation. Big Lake takes a super fiscally conservative approach here. They know that in the real world, not every single property tax bill is going to get paid on time. It just doesn't happen. So rather than crossing their fingers, they deliberately build their budget based on a 97 to 98% collection rate, which lines up perfectly with their historical data. They literally only budget based on what they practically expect to collect. It's just a brilliant, pragmatic way to avoid those sudden, scary financial shortfalls right in the middle of the year.
So, where does it all go once it's collected? When we look at expenditures, one thing stands out immediately. Exactly half, 50%, of every single general fund dollar is dedicated entirely to public safety. We're talking police, fire, emergency preparedness. The The rest of the money gets divided up between public works like street maintenance at 15%, general government at 14%, and culture and recreation at 12%.
And let me tell you, committing half of your core budget to public safety yields some incredibly tangible results. Big Lake was actually recently recognized as one of the top 10 safest cities in Minnesota for its population size. And I found this mind-blowing statistic in the report. Providing all these governmental services costs an average of just $5.80 a day per household and business. Out of that $5.80, public safety specifically costs just $2.65 a day. Think about that for a second. For less than the price of a basic cup of coffee, households are securing top-tier police and fire protection. That's pretty wild.
All right, Section 4, Enterprise Funds in Action, or Business-like Benefits.
Let's shift gears and look at that second major bucket we talked about earlier. While the general fund operates on about $7.37 million, Big Lake's business-type enterprise funds actually generated over $12.3 million in revenues for 2025. These are massive, complex operations running quietly in the background, and again, they're mostly funded by user charges, not your tax levies. The city runs 4 main ones: the water fund, the wastewater fund, the stormwater fund, and the liquor store fund. The really beautiful thing about these utility funds is that they are totally self-sustaining. So that water bill you pay every month, that goes directly into the water fund to pay for day-to-day operations, fixing the pipes, and future infrastructure upgrades. It's a direct, business-like transaction, and it keeps property taxes completely insulated from the cost of running utilities. Out of all of these, though, Lake Liquors is definitely the most unique setup. It operates exactly like a normal retail business. It completely relies on consumer sales to stay afloat. But here is the kicker. Because it is city-owned, any annual profits the store generates don't go into a private owner's pocket. They are transferred directly back into the city's general fund. So by running this successful retail enterprise, the city is literally helping fund public services, which in turn reduces the overall reliance on property taxes for everybody else. It's a total win-win.
And that brings us to our final section, Section 5. Big Lake's financial health and how they're safeguarding the future.
We've looked at the revenues, we've looked at the expenditures, but how does a city actually guarantee it won't just go completely broke if, say, a massive emergency hits, or if funding from the state is suddenly delayed? To understand that, we need to bust a little bit of financial jargon. The first term you need to know is unassigned fund balance. Simply put, this is the portion of the general fund's money that isn't already legally restricted, committed, or assigned to a specific project. It's essentially free and clear, available for any need. You can think of it as a really robust municipal savings account or a rainy day fund. And Big Lake's savings account is looking extremely healthy. Going into 2025, they are boasting an unassigned fund balance of $4.74 million. Now, the City Council doesn't just leave this to chance. They have a very strict internal rule that says this balance must absolutely never drop below 42% of the following year's general fund budget. Having $4.74 million sitting there keeps them safely above that 42% threshold, which means they're incredibly well insulated against unforeseen revenue drops or major community emergencies. The second piece of crucial jargon we need to demystify today is the bond rating. When a city needs to build a massive, expensive piece of infrastructure, like, say, a brand new water treatment facility, they often issue bonds, which is essentially just borrowing money. A bond rating is an independent grade that reflects how reliable the city is when it comes to repaying that debt. It is exactly like your personal credit score. The higher your score, the lower the interest rates you have to pay when you borrow. Well, it turns out Big Lake holds a very strong AA rating from Standard & Poor's. And this isn't just a municipal pat on the back, okay? It's an independent, totally objective validation of the city's disciplined budgeting, their strict reserve management, and their long-term financial planning. Ultimately, it means that when the city does have to borrow money to improve the community, they get absolutely fantastic interest rates, which saves the taxpayers a substantial amount of money over time. We have unpacked a ton of information today, from the macro $24 million budget all the way down to the micro $2.65 a day for public safety. We've seen exactly how Big Lake separates its governmental and enterprise buckets to maintain serious fiscal discipline and achieve that coveted AA bond rating. But as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to chew on. How does your own community manage its financial buckets to build a stronger future? Are they as transparent as Big Lake? I highly encourage you to go seek out your local government's financial reports, find out what your city's bond rating is, and see exactly how your local tax dollars are building the quality of life right outside your front door. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.